Do the best that we can.
Do the best we can. Okay, Shkoyach, Rav Shlomo, doing the utmost. Put it on. Yeah. Doing the utmost he can, and for everything for Abatzas HaTorah. The Schus HaTorah should be Megan for all of us. Just say over. Begin with a short uvda. It said that in the Soif Yomov, in the last Tkufa, the last times of the Sfas Emes, the great Ger Rebbe in Poland, it came about that he met the teenage Rogachover, Goin, and they brought the Rogachover to the Beis Medrash of the Sfas Emes. Sfas passed away young, he was 52 years old, but he was already a Mefursim Rebbe, very world-renowned. And in the Beis Medrash of Ger, this young teenage Rogachover met with the Sfas Emes. And all around there were Chassidim witnessing this, and there was a conversation going on between the Sfas Emes and the young Rogachover, where they went through Kol HaTorah Kula. It was a conversation that was going back and forth, and everybody was in wonderment about this great Pella child, this teenager, this phenomena of the Rogachover. After he left, the Rogachover left, the Chassidim approached the Sfas Emes, and they asked the Sfas Emes, what does he say about this Ilui, this tremendous amount of knowledge in this young mind? And the Sfas Emes replied, and he said, he must have a tremendous shmiras einayim. He must watch his eyes from seeing things which are not supposed to be seen. And that's what I see about this Yeled Pella, this phenomenal child, this teenager. All the Chassidim wondered, that's what he's answering about the Rogachover. He should have commented about this brain, this mind, this Yigiyas HaTorah, this phenomenal memory. Why did he mention his Shmiras Einayim? And the Sfas Emes replied, and he said, such a memory has to be a skula. It's something out of the regular, something that doesn't fit into the regular way of life. And he said the skula for such memory is what we say every day in Kriya Shema, twice a day or more. So the Sfas Emes, because we say Lo Yisasuru Achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem asher atem zoinim achreihem leman tizgeru. In order to remember, it must be that the Rogachover, this young teenager, must be very, very strict about what he sees and what he lets into his mind, because that's the way he's zoicha, that's the way he's privileged for this tizgeru. That was the Sfas Emes' take on the mind of the Rogachover. But maybe we could add an addendum. The Chassidish Svarim tell us, and it's quoted in the Yismach Yisrael, the great Alexander Rebbe, Lo Yisasuru Achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem, also mean, I'm just going to give it a little bit of my own contemporary touch, Lo Yisasuru Achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem. Don't listen sometimes to your mind and to your eyes. Sometimes you don't respect yourself. Sometimes you don't believe in yourself. Sometimes you accept how other people buttonhole you. And they say, you're good for this, you're good for that. You're not going to be successful in learning. You won't be successful in different endeavors. Lo yisasuru achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem asher atem zoinim achreihem. A person has to believe deep in his heart, deep in his neshama, there's a spark of the Eibishter that is connected, and he can reach heights and aspire to things that he doesn't even believe in his own heart that he has. That's how the Yismach Yisrael and other Svarim try to explain the Lo Yisasuru. That's also a school of Leman Tizgeru. If we believe that when we learn Torah, it's coming from a higher place, it's entered into our neshamas, it talks to our souls, it talks to the Chelek Elikam Imal, then we can understand the Torah then the Torah, we understand, is not just seichel enushi, it's not just intellect, it's much higher. It connects on a much higher level, and that's why ashreichem, any people who are able to be miyageya b'Torah on a high level and are willing to push themselves even past what they think they can understand, and that's something that we can aspire to. Bez Hashem b'schus HaTorah, the Eibishter will give us the Bona Chayim Mazoyna, the Shmira, the Torah Meginu Matzla, and we'll be Zeichen Mitzvah Hashem Tapsuras Toivos Yeshuas V'Nechamas. We'll begin now. I'm sure there were the other shiurim, but we'll begin with a ha'aris, a shtickle Torah, a little bit on the inyan of Riba b'shiurim and the yisoid of different malachas on Shabbos. We know there are shiurim in Hilchos Shabbos. If you're not allowed to cook, the shear is a groigeris of a large date. If you cook less than a large date, you're not chayiv on Shabbos, at least midaraisa. All malachas of Shabbos basically have different shiurim, and those shiurim are usually seen as a halacha l'moishe misinai. Now we also know there's another halacha, pikuach nefesh, is doicha kol ha'Torah kula, including Shabbos. So if there's a case of somebody who's sick and the doctor prescribes protein, and he needs cooked meat, l'marshal, as an example, and the person who's sick, there is no cooked meat around, so the doctor says you have to cook it up. So you take a pot of water, and the prescription said he needs 5 ounces of meat. That's what he needs. So you take the pot and you cook it up. So it's mutter, gomer. It's not only mutter, you're obligated to do it to save the person's life. However, instead of doing that, you added another 5 ounces of meat. Not to make the meat better, but you put into the pot before you put it onto the fire, you put an extra 5 ounces of meat. So now in total you have 10 ounces of meat. That's called ribui b'shiurim. You added more. The Ran in Mesechtes Beis Daf Yud Zayin, as quoted by the Beis Yosef, it's on page Beis in the Mara Mekemes. The Ran says, in the Bach and the Beis Yosef, they tell us, the Ran says that ribui b'shiurim is an Isser Daraisa. And it almost sounds like from the Ran you would have a chiyuv of skila, and if you did it b'shegig, you would have to bring a chatos. That means adding more food to the pot is an iser midoraisa. That's the shittas haran. The Rashba in that place in Mesechtes Beis Daf Yud Zayin, the Rashba tells us, I don't see the Rashba, it's quoted in the Beis Yosef in the Mara Mekemes. The Rashba argues and says that the shtin of ribui b'shiurim is the Rabbanon. If you're doing it with a heter, even though the heter is since the heter is a daraisa heter, because pikuach nefesh is poter, the halacha would be that it is din derabanan, and a din derabanan, you don't get chiyuv skila. So that means the machlekes. The Ran holds when you do more than the shear, when there was a heter act, a permitted act, it's an Isser Daraisa if you do more. And the Rashba holds it's an Isser Darabanan. The Ran brings almost a raya that you can't answer. From a Gemara Mesechtes Menachos Daf Samach Daled Amud Aleph, it's on page Beis of the Mara Mekemes. The Gemara poses a question. We know that the halacha is you're not allowed to pick apples off a tree. And if you pick an apple off the tree, you're over the Isser Daraisa on Shabbos of Kaitzer, because you're picking an apple. So if you pick the apple off the tree, the Isser is Kaitzer. Let's say there's a chayla, the Gemara says, who needs apple, or he needs dates, whatever it is. So, and the doctor says he needs 2 apples. So now, like a great Gemara's shaila, the Gemara poses a question. And the Gemara says, one branch, there are some branches on the tree. There are some individual branches that have 1 apple, 1 apple, 1 apple. So you could pick one apple, he could pick the second apple. That's 2 kaitzers and it's mutter. He has another branch which has 3 apples. He doesn't need the third apple. The Gemara says, what's better to do? Should he pull off 1 apple and 1 apple? Or should he pull off the branch that has 3 apples in one shot, in one swoop? And that way, he'll do it in 1 shot, not 2, but he's taking off 3. And the Gemara's Shakal V'Tori goes back and forth on that question. Which is preferable? Is it preferable to do the 1, or is it preferable to do the 2? Freik Duran.
Again, 1 second, problems that I'm getting very upset about this. They lost the audio. That's our song, good.
Zog the Gemara is Shakal V'Tori, back and forth, if it is or if it's not. So the Gemara says, the Gemara goes back and forth. Freik Duran, why should that be? Freik Duran. If I go according to me, I understand there's a reason to say that if you take off 3, it's something bad. But if you take off 1, if you go according to the Rashba, that the Rashba holds that what? That there is no Isari B'Shurim, what would be the problem of taking off a branch with 3? The third one is non-existent. That means Bishleim, according to the Ran, that Ribi B'Shiurim is Aser. So then the third one presents a problem, the third apple. So then we can understand the question that's posed by the Gemara. But if you hold that you take off the 3, the third one is nothing, because Ribi B'Shiurim Midarais is okay, so Freik Duran, what would be the question of the Gemara? Yeah, Donaldson.
Is there a shear b'kaitzer?
Absolutely, the same Gregoris, Mustama. Right? So Ibazoi Freik Duran, according to that shita, it shouldn't be Aser B'Chlal. Why shouldn't it be Aser? It shouldn't pose a question, because it's always a din Ribi B'Shiurim. I would call this question almost a question of like She'ein Oleh HaTshuva. What do you do with the Rashba? The Gemara is beferish, honoring that there would be an Isser on the Riboy B'Shiurim. So this is a question, okay? Yeah, this is a question that's posed by the Ran onto the Rashba. This is a Gavaldica question, that's posed by the Ran, and it's a mitzvah to be miyashiv this question. So in order to answer this question, I want to, like a good yid, pose another question. And I want to say, the Minchas Chinuch in Mitzvah Lamed Beis, which is the great, almost a separate chibur of the Minchas Chinuch on Hilchos Shabbos, Melechas Shabbos, and then he has a section on Pikuach Nefesh. In Ois Beis, the Minchas Chinuch also poses a question. He wants to bring a raya to the Rashba. Somebody is sick, and the Gemara Masechtas Chulin Daf Tesvav says, it's on page Dalet. So the Minchas Chinuch, the Gemara tells us, and this is one of the classic Lumdish cases in Shas, if someone needs to eat, a doctor prescribes him to eat, and you have to have fresh meat or fresh chicken. So the halach is shchita b'Shabbos is aser. So now we say, go do the shchita, because we have no fresh meat. There was no refrigeration, there was no thing, and they need fresh meat. So the halach is you're allowed to shech, to slaughter the animal or the bird on Shabbos. So the halach is pikuach nefesh is doich. Fragt the Minchas Chinuch, there should have been an addendum to that halacha. How much meat does the person need? He needs 10 ounces. He needs a 16-ounce porterhouse steak. He needs whatever he needs. So that's what he needs. When you shecht a big cow, a steer, you get pounds of meat. So if riboy b'shiurim is daraisa, the Gemara should say you should look for the scrawny animal, a skinnier animal, as close as their animal is to what you need. So why doesn't it say in halacha that when you're shechting for a chayla b'Shabbos, it's a whole sugi in Shas, hasheichet lechayla b'Shabbos, you're allowed to shecht. Why don't you say shecht the more, the skinnier, closer to what the goal that you need to accomplish? Why doesn't it say you have to narrow it down? So why is the halacha you can take even a smaller animal, you can take even a bigger animal? The halacha should be, that should be the halacha. Why don't we add that limitation and say you should take a smaller animal?
Take even a chai even.
What, you could take
a leg.
Or take a leg. Yeah, why would you do that? That's a separate sugya, why we allow you to shecht. Because even if you have nevela, we still allow you to shecht. Which is a sugya arucha, which will be a mitzvah Shem, another topic, everything. But we allow you to shecht. But once we allow you to shecht, so then the halacha should be, there should be this limitation.
Just find the smallest behemoth or find a different behemoth?
No, find the smallest behemoth. If you have a choice, you should always take the smallest behemoth, the smallest chicken, because you'll be Riba B'Shiurim. Bishleim, according to the Rashba, that Riba B'Shiurim is the Rabbanon, then I could understand. Okay, we're not makbid, it's a Rabbanon. We don't want to encumber the Pikuach Nefesh. But if it's an Issa Daraisa, you should be responsible and you should be obligated to find this smaller animal. Oh, one sec. So what about picking? Is also the Maisa picking. When you pick something off, it's also the Maisa picking, and still it would be Riba Shurim. When you put the pot down on the fire, it's the same thing. What are you saying? I'm sorry.
It doesn't matter a big life or a small life.
Okay, that's the physician speaking. Oh, the physician sagt guten teretz, which is really Or Sameach. Sagt Or Sameach. We have to analyze what the Isser is. What is the Isser of shechting an animal? Is the Isser permitting the meat? That's not the Isser. The Torah doesn't worry about meat becoming permitted. The Torah is Aser Netilas Neshama. Taking life, the life of the animal, Netilas Neshama, is the Shema Isser. That's what classifies the prohibition. But when you pick a thing off the tree, the Torah doesn't want the apples picked. It's the ktsira of the accomplishment of having the apple picked. Zoktor Sameach gewaldig in der Welt, Ramei Simcha. In Netilas Neshama, it doesn't make a difference how obese somebody is, or how big the animal is. Sido ein neshama. There's one life. So when you're shecht, you're always doing the same thing. You're taking neshama. That's one act. The shear is not connected to the Isser. However, when it comes to picking an apple off a tree, the more is the merrier. The more apples is more Isser. So on that, the Ran holds, there's Riboy B'Shiurim. So Memela, that's why the Ran would hold that way. Only when the shear defines the Isser, then there's a halacha of Riboy B'Shiurim. When the shear is just an additional factor in the Isser, then that does not reach the bar of the halacha of Riboy B'Shiurim.
Is the 3 apples one cut?
One cut.
So then 2 pickings is 2 pickings.
Right, that's the Gemara's question. So therefore the Gemara held 2 pickings versus 1 cut. On that the Ran asked, so 1 cut should be no problem according to the Rashba, which we still have to come back to answer.
You're basically saying there's no shear by Netilas Neshama?
There's obviously a shear, there has to be neshama. There has to be a neshama. I don't know what it's not that there's no shear. It's not that there's no shear. It's the word, the shear, even if there would be a shear.
Neshama is the same.
It's right. It's amazing. So now I want to say like this. So we're still left with the kasha on the Rashba. The Rashba's got, why when you pick the branch off the tree, don't you have 3? So I want to say like this. In order to answer this, I want to go off on a tangent for 2 minutes. The halacha is bishul is asur on Shabbos. So you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. Now you take an apple, you take an egg, And today is very chilly outside here in Brooklyn, New York. But let's say it would be very hot. And you take the egg outside, and it's 102 degrees outside, and you put the egg in the sun. And the egg becomes a soft egg or a hard egg, depending on the heat and how long you leave it there in the sun. The Gemara Masechta Shabbos tells us, Bishul Bechama is not only not chayiv, Bishul Bechama is muter. Bishul in the Torah needs a specific description. It needs fire and it needs fuel. So it needs both together. It needs fire and it needs fuel. And if it doesn't have fire and fuel, the halacha would be you're not chayiv and it's even mutter. The Gemara adds, and the Gemara says, if it's told as chama, that means let's say the chama warmed up the asphalt and then you fried an egg on the asphalt, then it's also midirabanan. But midaraisa, bishul bechama is mutter. Parenthetically, Rav Moshe Feinstein's Zatzal Igros Moshe says that microwave ovens are a type of bishul bechama, and he says if someone's in a hospital, he has a choice of lighting a fire or cooking something in a microwave. It would be better to opt for the microwave because of the rule of akal tchila, to look for the leniency, which is a shear for itself and maybe good fodder for a yarchikal on microwave. But however, Rav Moshe says it's bishul bechama. So bishul bechama is mutter gomer. Happens to be this week I found. Last week I found someone says even with a magnifying glass, you take a magnifying glass and you focus the rays of the sun onto a food item, that would also be bishul bechama. Unbelievable. The bishul bechama is mutter. Happens to be that Rashi says that the reason is because it's einoi derech, which would impact the microwave. Well, today it's really the derech. It's almost the normative way of cooking. However, the halacha of bishul bechama is, most Rishonim say it's because it has to be dumya the mishkan. In order to be dumya the mishkan, it needs fuel. It needs fuel and it needs fire.
I got the microwave, besides the actual cooking in the microwave, you're also turning on the microwave.
Right, but here also you're turning on the fire, you be chayv maver. When you turn on an oven, you chayv maver, turn on the electric. Okay. But you won't have the noise if you won't have the additional isser of the cooking. Yeah, that's true. Oh. Fragt the bir alocha, the Chofetz Chaim in Mishnah Brure, in Cynamon. Let's see, it's in the pages here. I just saw it before. It's in page of the Mara Mekoyim, just on page, which is called Tes Amid Beis in the Mara Mekoyim. I'll just speak it out. Fragt the Mishnah Brure, the Chofetz Chaim. I always thought this kasha was from the Minchas Chinuch. I remember hearing it from Rav Ezrachi Shlita in Eretz Yisrael, and it's such a kasha that passes that you can hear the Minchas Chinuch asking this question, but I couldn't find it in the Minchas Chinuch. It's in the Bir Halacha. There's a Gemara Masechtas Shabbos Daf Lam Divrei Mashchel V'Hadochoson Shin Yud Ches Siv Dalet. Yeah, in the middle of that paragraph, the Bir Halacha asks such. The Gemara tells us in Masechtas Shabbos Daf Lamed Tes that if there's a fish, like a very salty herring, which is inedible because it's so salty, and you take that fish and you run it under cold water, that's the way you have to eat it. You take a gush from the sink or from a kli, and you run it over, and that makes it edible. The Gemara says it's asur midoraisa to do that on Shabbos, because the Gemara says hadechoson, rinsing it off, zu gemar melachton. Rashi explains, making it edible is a makeh bepatish, which is somehow related to bishul. I don't want to get into that. Yeah, I see it here. I said it's here. Ches Amid Beis. Oh, zog ich, as if that, Dr. Be'alocha. So you take cold water, you run it over the fish. That's an Isser Daraisa. Now listen to the go'inus of the Bir Alocha. Zog te Chofetz Chaim. I don't understand. Take bishul bechama. You're not chayiv bishul. So you have an egg which is raw. and now you put it in the sun. It's not bishul, because bishul has some strict rule. It needs fuel and fire. And the sun is like fusion. It's not fuel and fire. So therefore the sun is not bishul. Forget about bishul. It's gemar malachdon. How is it worse than the fish itself? So now the egg wasn't edible, and putting it into the sun makes it edible. Okay, so take another item. The Gemara holds an egg is not edible. But let's take an item which is completely not edible. And you put it in the sun, you're not chayiv. Frek the Mishnah Brura, it's not worse than the salty fish. So let the sun be equated to the cold water of washing it off. A gewaldige kasha from the Mishnah Brura. So how could the Gemara say Bishul B'chama is permitted? It shouldn't be permitted. It can't be worse than Adachasan. And it bothers the Mishnah Brura if you see the words and you're used to reading Bi'alacha. He's agitated by this kasha. And he keeps going back and forth. What's going to be the answer to this kasha? L'chayra, thinking straight, it shouldn't be worse than Hadachasa. So I want to venture a teretz. And the teretz is like this. When I take a pot of water with raw meat or potatoes and put it on the fire, and I leave it on the fire, I'm chayiv mishum bishul on Shabbos. If I would take it off the fire right away and it wouldn't get cooked, I wouldn't be chayiv, which I'm sure there's a lot of shiurim about that. That means when I put it on the fire, like they say in Latin, garnish the geshen. Nothing happened because I just put it on the fire. Because I just put it there. When does the bishul take place? A half hour later. We know there's a rule in Shabbos. Grama is potter. Every bishul is really an act of grama. Because when you put it on the fire, it doesn't culminate until a half hour later. So putting the pot on the fire is really a grama for bishul. So what's the teretz to that kasha? The teretz to that kasha is like a brisker teretz. Bahachi amar rachmana. This is an exception to the rule of grama. Bishul is a special gzeiras hakosav. It's a special tenet of Shabbos that if you put something down, even though it's only later, I'm chayiv for my act now. Even though it's a grama, but I'm chayiv for putting it down on the fire. Of course it has to cook. But putting raw food on a fire is an isser for itself. That's a chiddush ha-Torah. Really, if I would look at the outcome, it would be a grama. The only reason it's mutter is the reason it's asur, it's forbidden, it's prohibited, is because of what? Because of a gzeres hakosav. If that's true, that's only true by bishul. All other malachis, grama is potter. So I want to say like this. When you put something down in the chama, it's only going to cook in a half hour. I want to be chayiv for bishul. If it would be bishul, I would be chayiv, because that's gzeres hakosav. Now what do you want to tell me? It's not bishul. It's chayiv because of gemar malacha makeh bepatish. Regarding the makeh bepatish, it's a groma, because that's going to only happen later. When you put the fish under the water, that happens simultaneously with washing it off the water. So then you could be chayiv. But if you want to utilize a bishul act, that bishul act is grama. If you're not chayiv mishum bishul, you can't be chayiv. That's the pshat in the Gemara. Of course, hadachasan zu malachton, but that has to happen simultaneous. It has to be a ma'aseh. But if it goes because of the halacha of bishul, that's bishul b'chama. So it's no good. Gewaldig in the Welt. Which would be an exception. I'm not going to talk about it now. I spoke about it Shabbos in the shul. When you thought about the mun, it got cooked right away. Could be thinking about the mun was like a gemar malachton, because that happened right away. But that's for a separate shir. But Al Kopanim, there's a chiluk between the gemar malacha and all 38 malachas. Besides bishul. Bishul is an act, even though the outcome doesn't happen till later. Imkain, I want to say Gevaldik. When a person goes and picks apples off the tree, you know what defines his malacha? Apples off the tree. So if there's 2 apples, he took 2 apples off the tree. If there's 3 apples, the malacha was taking 3 apples off the tree. Because the outcome is part of his act of the malacha. And therefore, riboy b'shiurim would be asa. Bishul is a very interesting malacha. The outcome is completely disconnected to what I do. When I put it on the fire, it's my act of doing a ma'isa bishul. The outcome is not part of my isser. My isser is putting the pot on the fire. That's the pshat in the Rashba. There's only one isser by bishul, the ma'isa. The outcome is disconnected from the isser, because that happens with a grama. So by bishul, the Rashba says, there's no halacha of riboy b'shiurim, because riboy b'shiurim only applies when it's the outcome focused isser. So then we look at the shear, which makes the isser. By bishul, it's not the outcome, it's the ma'isa, because the outcome is disconnected from me. It's only a grama. Therefore, the Rashba says, Ran, I agree with you in the Gemara in Menachos. That would be riboy b'shiurim when it comes to kaitzer. Bishul is an outlier. Bishul is a separate halacha, because bishul is a chiddush halacha. It's an act of isser without an outcome. Now you do need the outcome, because if not, it's not called the ma'isa bishul. But that's not your isser. Your isser would be the putting the pot on the fire. So if you put the pot on the fire, so therefore it doesn't make a difference how much is there. So it's very comparable to the Or Sameach. Just like by Netilas Neshama, there's one Neshama. By Bishul, there's one Ma'isa Bishul. Putting the pot on the fire, it doesn't make a difference how much is in the pot. When it comes to other malachas, the halacha would be that you have to look at the outcome. Since you have to look at the outcome, so therefore the halacha would be, there is riboy b'shiurim. So I just want to chazer over what we said. There's a machlokes, the Rashba and the Ran. If you put a pot on the fire for a chayla, and you put extra meat into the pot, the Ran holds it's an isser daraisa, the Rashba holds an isser darabanan. The Ran asks from a Gemara Masechtas Menachos Daf Samach Daled that by kaitzer it seems beferish in the Gemara if there are 3 apples and you only need 2, you're chayiv riboy b'shiurim. It's a kasha on the Rashba. We said over the Minchas Chinuch Mitzvah Lamed Beis, Ois Beis, and Pikuach Nefesh asks from Netilas Neshama, from Shchita, that the din should be you should have to look for a skinnier behema. So the Or Sameach answers in a wonderful way and says there's no din like that because it's only one ma'isa isser of Netilas Neshama. More doesn't create more isser. And so that's how we answered up to Minchas Chinuch's kasha on the Ran. And now we're adding, since the kasha to be alocha, bishul b'chama, so bishul b'chama is not a bishul. So therefore, why doesn't it have the din like the din in Masechta Shabbos Daf Lamed Tes, that it would be Gemar Malachta and the kasha to be alocha? So we said because maybe by bishul it's really a grama, and therefore it's a chiddush din that only applies to bishul. Parenthetically, I just want to tell you, look in the 2nd or 3rd chelik of Yabia Omer from Rabbi Avadia Yosef Zatzal. He has a Shakov Atari with Reb Hirsch Pesach Frank, the Baal Har Tzvi, the Rav of Yerushalayim, and Reb Hirsch Pesach Frank has a big question. It's an unbelievable tshuva back and forth, a great Shakov Atari, if maybe koisiv is comparable to bishul, because until the ink dries, it's also not a chiyuv, and it's a wonderful thing to look at. You can see that Shakov Atari.
Therefore, all kaisim is also grommadik iser.
Right, kaisim will be a grommadik iser. Unbelievable. He sells a chelkas machay. It's a shakav atayah that's mamish like a ruach hakodesh, a gewaldike shakav atayah. But yes.
Why isn't each plucking considered a riboy itself?
No, so that's the question of the Gemara. Is each plucking more iser, or is one plucking with more? That's a almost philosophical question of the Gemara of what that would be. So in order to just finish it off, I want to tell you like this. Many of us who learned in yeshiva were brought up with this word without really knowing the source. They used to say over from the Brisker Rav that the Brisker Rav had a chakira. And the Brisker Rav said, what is the Isser of Geneva? We know there's an Isser of Geneva. But what's the Isser of Geneva? Is the Isser of Geneva causing loss to your friend? So when you steal, the loss caused to your friend, that defines the Geneva? Or is Geneva the act of Geneva? You're doing a Maisa, an act of stealing, and stealing, by definition, means there's a loss to your friend. Now, this really sounds like how many angels are on a pin, you know? But it's really a question. What is the Yesod of Geneva? Which really, I always thought the impact is a Gewaldige impact. And I'm not saying halacha, because this would open up a Pandora's box. Two people, the shear of Geneva is a pruta. If you steal less than a pruta, it's insignificant, and midoraisa, it's not a real Geneva. You have two people who own an object which is worth a pruta. So they're partners. Each one has rights to a half a pruta. And I go and I steal the total pruta. So now I go and I steal the total pruta. Am I chayiv Geneva midoraisa? If you look at Geneva in the perspective of the loss, each party lost only a half a pruta. So therefore the halacha would be, midoraisa wouldn't be us. But if you look at Geneva from the perspective of the act of the Maisa, so then the Isser would be what? The Isser would be mitzad the Maisa, not, and therefore you did a Maisa of stealing an act of stealing a pruta. That would be the perfect way to think about this question posed by the Brisker Rav, you know, which would really open up Pandora's box. If you walk into a Cadillac auto sales and you steal a Cadillac, how many people own that Cadillac? If it's a Cadillac owned dealership. Every GM stockholder. How much does each person have in that Cadillac? Less than a pruta.
CEO maybe.
Well, even with the CEO multiples, I think he wouldn't have a pruta in there. So then it would come out mutter, according to that tzad, lo ya'ala al hadas. I happen to have brought one saraya from Shevet Kahuna. It says you're not allowed to steal because of Shevet Kahuna. It seems like this goes into the whole corporate question, that maybe there's an ownership of corporation. But that would be the shaila of the Brisker Rav. So, what should I tell you? Today everything is codified. And Baruch Hashem, there's a Gewaldige Sefer, which is almost an encyclopedia of Lamdas, from Yedidi of Kalbach in Yerushalayim, the Sefer Chavatzeles HaShoron. And he brings, I think it's in Parshas Emor, I don't remember where it is, that he brings Shomati Mimoiri V'Rabbi Agoyno Bavom Yeshua Soloveitchik Shlita. Maise Shehoya in Kranitz. Kranitz was the vacation place in Galicia, Poland. Sha'agoyn le'menachem zemba Hashem yimkem damoy. Hoya eitzel moren agriz the Brisker Rav. B'pshitolei sha'agoyzel mechaveiroi shove mone harei ze oiver belav deloy sigzol echad. That means if you stole something, he quoted the question a different way. When you steal something, another addendum, which I didn't think of till when I saw this. A person has to steal for pikuach nefesh. I don't know what it is. The mafia's after him, whatever it is. So he has to steal something to do something. And he only needs $10. Is he allowed to steal $100? That was Reb Menachem's question. Hashem yimkem damai. What did Reb Menachem mean to ask? Menachem Zemba. Is there riba b'shiyurim b'geneva? Just like there's a question of riba b'shiyurim by Isurei Shabbos, it's mutter for me to steal $10. and I'm stealing 100. Do you say Riba B'Shiurim just like there is on Bishul? And it should be totally in the Rashba and the Ran. According to the Rashba, it's an Issa D'Rabbanan. According to the Ran, it would be an Issa D'Oraisa. And the Briskerov said, Al Kol Pruta Pruta, you're over an Isser. Which would really point in the direction of the tzad of the Briskerov, of his question, that Geneva is a loss-based Isser, not a Maisa-based Isser. Because if it would be a Maisa-based Isser, there's one Maisa. If it's a loss-based Isser, then it could be Al Kol Pruta Pruta. And there's a whole shak of Etaria in the same. Lefit Varenu, it would be, even according, this would be Tolui, that if it would be a loss-based issue, then the Rashba would be Moiditz in Issa D'Oraisa. Because the only reason the Rashba argues is because it's a Maisa-based Isser. So Im Kain, according to Dvorenu, the Chakir of the Briskerov, would be a question according to the Rashba, which is quoted in the Beis Yosef, that Riboy B'Shiurim would be, the Rabbanon would be tied to this Lamdisha Chakira, that the conversation of the Briskerov with Reb Menachem Zembe in Kranitz would have been a question for the issue of Riboy B'Shiurim. What? Oh, what do you mean, and what? I hear. That would be totally in the Stodom. So this is a tremendous...
It's a loss based. The whole concept of stealing, how much loss you incur, you're causing the person to lose.
I hear, right. Oh, no, but you're saying the Svara. The Briskerov had a Svara, which is a shear for itself, that maybe the Isser of Geneva is the Isser. This would have to do with Chatzi Shasam and HaTorah. So I just want to finish off. Just take 1 minute. I said it in the shul on Shabbos. Le'nitne Torah ela la'ichlei Haman. Well, that's very nice. They lived a life of man. But why le'nitne Torah ela la'ichlei Haman? Said one of the things that people always amazalzel, they put down and they denigrate Leim de Torah. They say people who are learning in the arts, in medicine, in the business world, they're creating with their thoughts. But when people who are learning Torah, so they're thinking, noch hasvar from Teisvis, noch hasvar from the Briskerov. What are they accomplishing? And it sometimes gets into our neshamas, like gets into us. What are we doing? The Eichlei Aman understood when they thought something should become cake, it became cake. When something should become kugel, it became kugel. It's going to be in the Daf Yomi in a week or two. So that's what the man was. They were living in the reality that thinking creates reality, creates facts on the ground. They were able to feel that by thinking and learning, we're creating reality. We're creating a metzius of dira b'tachtainim. We're creating an abode for the Eibishter. We're being mesakin the world b'malcha shakai. By bringing more Torah, by talking and learning, it's a reality. It creates a shmira. And that's why lo nitne Torah ela la'ichlei Haman. The more Torah, the more riboy b'shiurim of Torah. It creates a protective dome over so many people and so many, and the fact itself of doing the Ratzon Hashem. Shluchei mitzvah, Einen Nezakin is this week's parsha, in Parsha Shalach. Uri'isem oisayu zachartem. Uri'isem is begeder roya ani es divrei admoin. Roya ani means when I say to somebody in English or in Yiddish, I see what you're saying, means I appreciate, I understand what you're saying. Uri'isem oisay. We have to appreciate what we're doing. Let's not fall into despair. Let's not fall into unhealthy low esteem. Let's believe that what we're doing has a tremendous power, a tremendous koyach. The limud HaTorah, yes, the limud HaTorah. Not only, of course, we need a Cyrus, of course, we need the Dvarim, Shabamusar, and to tell us about life's accomplishments and what we have to do. Lass gitzen and lernen, lass trachten, was mehr mit trachten lernen, what more we steig and grow in learning will bring up everything around us. Thank you to Rav Goddess Shlita and to everybody for keeping this gewaldige endeavor going. Shol bi zeichem mit Hashem to Psuras Tevis Yeshuas v'Nechamas.
Amen.